As Paul said, Julian and Joaquin are identical twins.
You can tell which one of us is running for president.
Nobody wants him to drop out more than I do because I want to be able to shave this beard off.
How about your wife?
Same thing.
What Julian, running for president, believes in and why he does, and Joaquin, as a member of the House Intelligence Committee, a member of Congress, both devoted to public service.
You know, I want to make sure that if we're going to go through the difficult process of transitioning our healthcare system, y'all remember, of course, that there were 7 presidents before Barack Obama that actually tried to achieve some form of universal health care. Obviously, the ACA was accomplished in 2010, but not without a political price to pay for that, and a lot of turmoil after that. The Tea Party and everything that happened in 2010, 2014, and so forth. So, you know, I believe that if we're going to do that again, and we should do it, that we need to make sure that everybody is covered this time. Like it has to be universal health care coverage for everyone, and that we should build it off of a Medicare system that would be Medicare would be default. So you could have a private health insurance plan under my approach if you wanted to, but somebody who's unemployed, somebody who's just born, somebody who is poor, they automatically, without any questions asked, would become part of this plan. And in the last debate, Senator Harris had asked Vice President Biden about the fact that his plan would leave 10 million people uncovered. So I started that conversation on the stage, and he had said that some people would have to buy in. If you lost your job, you would have to buy in. And so I picked up on that, and I said, look, that's right. The fact that you have to buy in means that people are going to be uncovered. He said no, that they wouldn't have to buy in. I said yes, and that was the argument. Unfortunately, the news media picked up on, as you say, the style.
Don't you remember what you said 2 minutes ago?
Which was directly related to the fact that he had denied saying a phrase that he used, 2 minutes ago. I should say, and I've said in the time since then, and I've said for a long time, the Vice President and I know each other. We served in the administration. It was not a personal thing. I have tremendous respect for him. So, in my vision of things, when somebody crosses the border without permission, it would still be against the law. It would just be enforced in a civil process and not a criminal one. What this administration has done is that they've taken a section of the law called Section 1325 of the Immigration and Nationality Act that came along in the late 1920s by a segregationist senator, Senator Blease, who openly advocated lynching. And this law was basically not enforced for 60 years until post 9/11. And then it started ratcheting up. When Trump took over, Trump supercharged that. And he started weaponizing Section 1325, which makes it a misdemeanor if you cross the border. It's a misdemeanor, not a felony, but a misdemeanor. But he used that to incarcerate migrant parents and to separate them from their little children. And what I've said is that I want to end those family separations. And because this is a law that for a long time was there but was not even used, that we don't need that law to enforce accountability in our immigration system. But if we can take it out, we can remove a tool that a future administration that is Trump-like would have to do what he has done. And, of course, Republicans are going to suggest that no matter who the Democrat is, that Democrat is for open borders. I think most Americans don't, because most Americans, right, we don't have direct experience with the deportation process, the immigration court process, don't realize that that is actually a civil process. That's not normally a criminal process if you're up for deportation or you have an asylum claim.
What does a wall do?
I don't think that it does much, actually. I think it's mostly symbolic for the president, and it's become part of political symbolism for him. And, like I said, that's what he's built his campaign around. And there's been a lot of fear-mongering and scapegoating that's gone on. And fortunately, those of us who are closer to the border, certainly border representatives in towns like Laredo and El Paso, in places in Arizona and California, San Diego, have spoken up about the misinformation that's put out there about border communities and about immigrants. And, you know, these are some of the safest cities in the United States, and yet, you know, they are cast as dangerous places in order to support something like a border wall.
They've also taken other steps to make it more difficult for people to actually become citizens through the legal process.
Between the period from when Donald Trump was elected president in November of 2016 and before he took office in January of 2017, I had put a statement on Twitter that said that I thought that if somebody was a legal permanent resident and had the right to petition for citizenship at that point, that they should probably do that before Donald Trump actually took office. And I was criticized by some, including organizations that I love and work with, as scaring people. You're scaring people, right? And I didn't argue about it back then. I just said, look, I'm not trying to scare anybody. This is just, I just think that they're going to come after not only undocumented folks, their idea is also to restrict legal immigration. But what Stephen Miller and the White House have tried to do is gone way beyond even what I thought they would back then. I thought that they would go after legal immigrants, but now they've discussed going back and looking at people's citizenship applications and denaturalizing citizens.
My plan would invest those kinds of resources and effort and coordination into not only ending veteran homelessness, but family homelessness, chronic homelessness, youth homelessness by 2028. And it's an ambitious plan, but I believe that we could do that. You know, that we can still do big things. But the policy that I was excited about that was nowhere on the radar screen of my campaign or the folks that do policy was animal welfare. That I've kept saying like that, oh, I want to do something on animals, you know, how we can better protect animals and wildlife. And, you know, people are like, oh, what are you talking about? You know, the hell, this is a presidential campaign. In the San Antonio Express News in 2004 called Death by the Pound. And it was an expose of the fact that San Antonio had one of the highest euthanasia rates for cats and dogs anywhere in the nation. We were euthanizing as many animals as LA was, even though LA was, you know, a couple of times or 3 times bigger at the time than San Antonio. And so I became active at that time, and then as mayor, in trying to drive toward a no-kill status at our shelter, which basically means that you have a live release rate of at least 90%. And eventually we got there in San Antonio.
Where is the gun issue, and how does Texas relate to that? I know that it has this long history, pioneer history and all that.
I just think there's been a sea change among everyday Americans on this issue. I mean, the conventional wisdom was that that this was an issue that you couldn't touch, that the NRA was so powerful, that it had all this money, that and you know, just don't go there, basically, to politicians. And the thing that I've been happiest to see in the midst of so much sadness and grief about what has happened in our country is more and more people in politics, especially Democrats, standing up to the NRA and running fully against their agenda.
And what is your gun policy?
We released this plan to disarm hate that includes a lot of the same common sense gun safety legislation that you heard on the stage the other day. You know, universal background checks, the assault weapons ban, the 7-day waiting period, limiting the capacity of magazines. I also would increase the excise tax on guns and ammunition and take the $600 to $700 million that would raise annually and invest that in local gun violence prevention programs, because I also want to focus on 2 things that we don't talk enough about, which is the fact that you have, and I think Corey spoke to this the other day on the stage, a lot of the gun violence that happens, you know, is not only in the mass shooting context. That's not most of it. Most of it happens in our neighborhoods. The other thing that we need to address is, and I call for this in my plan, the fact that more than half of the deaths by gun are deaths by suicide. And so I connect the dots of that we need to end the distinction between physical health care and mental health care and invest in mental health care. And also do things like these red flag laws or extreme risk protection orders that allow family members or somebody else who sees somebody that might be a harm to themselves or to somebody else to step in and get a court order to prevent their access to guns where it's appropriate and where that's granted by a judge. My mother became the first to be able to graduate from high school, and then she actually went on to college. She became a hellraiser when she was young, joined the Young Democrats, and then the Raza Unida Party.
Maria del Rosario, right?
Yeah,
Rosie.
Yeah, Rosie is how everybody knows her down there.
Yeah.
But she belonged to this third party that at the time was saying that neither the Republican nor Democratic Party was serving the needs of Hispanics in Texas and other places, and so they wanted to see some progress there. Then we came along, and we would get dragged to speeches and rallies and 3-hour organizational meetings. And
Your dad, Jesse Guzman, a math teacher.
Yeah.
And why aren't you Joaquin and Julian Guzman?
Our parents weren't married. Castro was my mother's name, is my
Yes.
mother's name, and my grandmother's name before her. Castro was my grandmother's name, who was unmarried, and gave that to my mother, who was not married to my dad, and gave that to us. And so, we were raised by these two strong women that made sure that we had so many more opportunities than they ever could have dreamed of. But yeah, there's a funny story about that. When my dad registered us for school, when we started kindergarten, he actually put us in as Guzman. And then my mother switched that back at some point.
Although we do have a good relationship with our dad.
Yeah, we have a great relationship with our father, and I don't live too far. I live like less than a mile from him, and
he was at the
sees our
debate.
Kids. He was there at the debate.
There is a cost to our democracy in allowing a president to abuse power without responding to it in a formal way. If you do that, you're undermining the democracy, not just now, but for the future. So let me take an example that's separate from the Russia stuff, the obstruction of justice stuff. I want to take this recent example of reports that the president has threatened support for Ukraine unless Ukraine basically dishes dirt on Joe Biden. That is an abuse of power. That is a clear abuse of power by the President of the United States. That act alone is an impeachable act. You're threatening a foreign country and asking them to take out a political opponent to your benefit, and if they don't do that, then you're threatening U.S. government resources, or it's going to affect U.S. foreign policy. That, to me, it's those kinds of abuses of power and others that you've got to address. And whether that's ultimately an impeachment charge, in the articles of impeachment or not, I think part of what you see with Donald Trump is that he does so many bad things, some of them big and some of them small, that he tries to overwhelm you with the badness, right? So that you basically become paralyzed, and all of that stuff gets normalized. You become paralyzed and just don't do anything, and you accept it. And then the entire society, because you've done nothing, in a way becomes complicit and part of it. And we can't allow that to happen.
What's the first thing that you would do if you're elected president? And I told him that the first thing I would do as president is that I would sign an executive order recommitting the United States to the Paris Climate Accord so that we send a signal that we're going to lead again on climate change. My favorite part of the day would actually come a little bit earlier, when it's traditional for the new president to usher out the outgoing president. And that I can imagine being there with my wife, Erica, and our daughter, Karina, who's 10, and our son, Christian, who's 4. Y'all know that scene on the White House lawn, right? Getting ready to say goodbye to Donald Trump and Melania Trump. And the helicopter will be there, ready with the door open for them to walk in. That they'll be ready to go off to Mar-a-Lago or like New York or somewhere. Yeah. And that right before he leaves, right before he walks away, I'm going to tell him, adios. That's my adios Trump story.
Thank y'all for having us.
Thanks a lot, y'all. Thank you for having us. Thank y'all.